Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon were not your average travelers. They were best friends, thoughtful and adventurous, full of dreams and a quiet resolve to make a difference. Both had saved and planned for this trip to Panama for months, not just for leisure, but to immerse themselves in a culture very different from their own. Kris, 21, with her fiery red hair and gentle demeanor, had just earned her degree in cultural social education. She had a deep passion for art and helping people, especially children. Lisanne, 22, taller and more reserved, had completed her studies in applied psychology. Together, they were determined to explore Latin America, improve their Spanish, and volunteer with underprivileged children. They arrived in Panama in mid-March 2014. The first 2 weeks of their journey were spent touring the country, enjoying beaches, volcanoes, and the colorful towns that dotted the lush Panamanian landscape. On March 29th, they arrived in Boquete, a charming town in the western highlands known for its cool climate and scenic mountains. There, they moved in with a local host family, preparing to begin their volunteer placement at a school the following week. But things took a turn. On April 1st, 2014, Kris and Lisanne decided to hike the El Pianista Trail, a moderately difficult route that leads into the misty cloud forest and up into the mountains. According to reports, they left around 11 a.m. with only one small backpack between them. They brought essentials: 2 phones, a camera, snacks, a water bottle. A dog from the nearby El Pianista restaurant followed them for a while, a silent companion on their journey. That dog returned alone. When the girls didn't come home that evening, concern began to grow. Initially, the host family assumed they had stayed out longer than expected. But when they failed to show up the next morning for an arranged walk with a local guide, and their phones remained off, the alarm was raised. For the first few days, local search teams combed the trail and surrounding areas. On April 6th, the girls' parents flew in from the Netherlands. They brought Dutch police, search dogs, helicopters, and coordinated with local authorities. Posters went up around Boquete. The jungle was searched on foot and by air, but there were no signs. No footprints, no broken branches, no clothing. The trail led only to silence. 10 weeks passed with little progress. Then, on June 11th, an Ngabe woman walking along a riverbank near the remote village of Alto Romero, more than 8 miles from the summit of the El Pianista Trail, discovered something unsettling: a blue backpack resting on a rock just above the waterline. Inside were the women's possessions: 2 pairs of sunglasses, $83 in cash, their passports, Lisanne's camera, a water bottle, and both of their phones. Kris's white iPhone and Lisanne's Samsung Galaxy. All of the items were dry and appeared strangely intact, despite the rainforest's heavy rainfall. Locals insisted the area had already been searched weeks prior, raising troubling questions. How had the backpack ended up there? Who placed it so carefully? Investigators turned to the phones. What they found was disturbing. The first attempt to call emergency services had been made at 4:39 p.m. on April 1st, just hours after the girls set off on their hike. The call didn't go through due to lack of signal. Over the next 10 days, more than 70 attempts were made from both phones to reach emergency numbers in Panama and the Netherlands. Lisanne's phone stopped functioning on April 6th, likely after running out of battery. Kris's phone, however, continued to be powered on and off until April 11th. On some days, someone attempted to unlock the iPhone, entering the wrong pin several times, then ceasing entirely. It seemed as though whoever was trying to access the phone no longer knew the code. Then came the photos. Lisanne's Canon camera contained 133 images, most taken on April 1st. They showed the girls smiling and posing on the El Pianista Trail, crossing streams, standing near lookouts, arms draped around each other in the sunlight. But then, nearly a week later, a second set of photos appeared, time-stamped between 1 and 4 a.m. on April 8th. Over 90 pictures taken in pitch darkness, using flash Most were abstract. Shots of rocks, leaves, plastic wrappers, and pieces of clothing. One appeared to show the back of Kris's head, possibly stained with something dark. Another showed what looked like plastic bags or food wrappers carefully placed on a rock. Some images suggested movement or panic. Others looked deliberate, almost methodical. Why would someone take so many pictures in the middle of the night, in complete darkness? Then came the most heartbreaking discovery. Not long after the backpack surfaced, local indigenous searchers found a pair of shoes near the same river. Inside one boot was a human foot, remarkably well preserved. The foot was identified as Lisanne's. In the weeks that followed, bones were discovered, a piece of a pelvis, a rib, and later fragments of skin. Kris's bones were among them, but they puzzled forensic analysts. Her remains showed signs of unnatural whitening, a degree of bleaching not easily explained by the forest environment. Some experts suggested chemicals were involved. Lisanne's bones, in contrast, showed natural decomposition. How two people exposed to the same climate could show such different patterns of deterioration became a central question. Despite this, the official conclusion from Panamanian authorities was that the girls had gotten lost, wandered into dangerous terrain, and succumbed to the elements. But many, especially those in the Netherlands, were unconvinced. Why would they hike a remote trail alone with so few supplies? Why hadn't search teams found them earlier, when the area was actively combed? And why were key pieces of evidence found in places that had supposedly already been searched? In 2021, former prosecutor Betsaida Pitti co-authored a book supporting the accident theory, but critics argued that many troubling details had been left out, including early case files that considered kidnapping and violent crime. Public attention surged again in 2022, when a podcast titled Lost in Panama reopened the case. Journalists interviewed locals, guides, and former officials. A local tour guide was briefly implicated in online theories, but no formal charges were ever made. Rumors swirled that Lisanne and Kris had been followed, that they encountered someone dangerous, that evidence had been planted. But none of it stuck. No definitive proof of wrongdoing ever emerged. Then, in 2024, a new book titled Still Lost in Panama shattered the official narrative. It was based on more than 3,000 pages of confidential legal documents, photos, maps, and internal communications, most never released to the public. The authors, a pair of Dutch investigative journalists, spent years collecting overlooked evidence and speaking with locals who had never been questioned before. Among their findings were early witness reports suggesting the women had been seen, in different locations, after their supposed disappearance. Others described suspicious activity near the trail, possible sightings of the girls with unknown men, and contradictory statements made by search organizers. More alarming was the claim that Panamanian officials may have shifted the investigation from foul play to accident in order to avoid harming the country's growing tourism industry. And what of the camera? Experts suggested that the photos taken on April 8th may have been staged. Items in the photos seemed arranged. Some believe the images were an attempt to signal for help. Others think they were planted to confuse. As the book concluded, if this was an accident, it was the most elaborate, confusing accident in the history of the Panamanian jungle. Today, the trail to the truth remains as tangled as the rainforest itself. We may never know exactly what happened to Kris Kremers and Lisanne. Froon, were they victims of misadventure, of nature's unforgiving grip? Or did they cross paths with someone who meant them harm? What we do know is this: 2 young women with bright futures vanished into the jungle, leaving behind a trail of haunting clues. A phone that rang for days, a camera that captured darkness, a backpack that reappeared, and families still searching, not just for answers, but for justice. Even now, more than 10 years later, the case continues to inspire deep investigation, heartfelt speculation, and solemn reflection. It is a case that reminds us how fragile safety can be how quickly a moment can turn, and how, in the thick silence of the jungle, some mysteries may never be fully untangled. But one truth echoes through the mist. Kris and Lisanne deserved better. They deserved to come home. And as the sun disappears behind the cloud forest, one question still lingers, quiet and unresolved. What really happened on that trail? Thank you for listening. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And as always, good night.